This is the Aftermarket Radio Network.
Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of Diagnosing the Aftermarket A to Z. I'm Matt Fanslow, and that's no moon, that's a space station. That and more after a word from our sponsor, Napa Auto Tech Training. Let Napa Auto Tech's Build-A-Tech program, like Build-A-Bear, help you turn your general technician into a moneymaker for your shop. Make them a profitable member of your team. Go to napaautotech.com for more details. All right, guys, I have hit the elite. I have got none other than Scott Manna's friend on the podcast.
It didn't take long for the first barb to go.
Well, if you don't know who he is, too bad. You're going to have to figure it out. It's John Thornton, and I think at risk of blowing smoke up his tail, he's the bar by which we measure every other instructor and presenter in our profession. And I don't mean that as a butt kiss. It's serious, and I think we can back that up.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Really don't. There's not much to say after that. I will tell you, Scott Manna is a good friend of mine, so that part of the opening was very true, as you are. I was curious. You and I have known each other for a long time, many years, and sometimes, when you know people for a long time, you forget when you met them. How long has it been? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? You want to take a guess? Because I have it to the month.
You have it to the month, so I kind of want to say October-ish of 99.
Okay, well, it's pretty close. I have January of 2020. And the only reason I know that is because when I first met you, when I was first introduced to you, that's when the friendship started. So it's a long time ago. So I had no idea who you were, but I had just started to do training in Minneapolis. So that was my first visit up to Minneapolis. And that's where we first met at a training event. Quickly thereafter, somehow you convinced me to take you out to lunch every time I would come up to do a training event. So I don't know exactly how that happened, but...
Well, I was really green, but I had asked you if you wanted to meet for lunch, and I couldn't believe it, but you said yes. And then you wouldn't let me pay. I was getting trained. So the training began right away. So I had a lot to learn.
So you can tell right away I'm a friend of Scott Manna, but I don't let you pay, just...
Well, I didn't know Scott, at the time. So, the story was that I had read your column because Mark Warren told you that you were a columnist, not a writer. And you were writing half of the Diagnostic Dilemmas column in the Underhood Service magazine.
Right. Gary Gomes out of Colorado, and I would alternate. And I did that, I think, 2 to 3 years. It was a pretty interesting experience. I didn't realize at the time how difficult it was to actually write an article that, where you have to take your thoughts, how you went about the diagnosis, and be clear on paper. It's one thing like now we're talking, it's easy to kind of think, well, what word should I use to describe, or what point should I make? Or, by the way, I can add this. But when you put something on paper, it's complete. I mean, once it goes to press, it goes to press, and that's it. There's no, I meant to say this, or I forgot to add that. It was a good experience. It was, it was kind of the start of the idea of documentation, for me. We can talk about that a little bit later as we get going here. But, I think it is important whether one is an instructor, teacher, or a diagnostic tech, that we learn how to effectively document our processes and our diags. So, for example, you might be working on a vehicle that's challenging. You kind of have an idea what's going on, but maybe you haven't run into this problem yet. It's new to you. But, you're working your way through it. You're making headway. It might be a little bit slower than you like, but you are moving forward. And then when you're done, you come to the conclusion, it's a good diag. That night when you get home, it's worth, at least my opinion, it's worth to think about, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And for me, it's therapy. I put that in a PowerPoint. So whether I ever use it in class or not is really unimportant. But it goes into a PowerPoint, and it hopefully, the next time I have something similar to that type of vehicle or that type of diagnosis, that I know I'll change my procedure just a little bit. Maybe I won't do this. Maybe I'll do this. Or maybe this test is not as good as I thought it was. Maybe there's a test that's more effective. But, getting back to the magazines, that was kind of the process. The car's fixed. So, I'm always happy about that. But then how do you effectively share that journey? How do you make sure it's not just about the car's fixed and it took an injector or, it was an engine computer? What was the process? What were the tests that were used? Why was this a good test? Why was his other test, didn't really more of a time waster than anything else? It was enjoyable, but no exaggeration. That would take me the better part of a Sunday to knock out an article. So, you think about that. The car's already done. I've already kind of documented, I've saved my scan data, my scope data. If I pull something from the Ford website, I save that. If I pulled it from All Data, I save that. So I have everything in a folder, and now it has to be assembled, into hopefully something that makes sense.
Yeah, because I don't think I could have timed it better. Coming out of my third year, being introduced to scopes, having to use both the big box analyzer scopes and the handhelds, which was like the Fluke 97, and then Sun would have been like the LS 2000, OTC Vision / Matco Insight / Intero PDA 100. We had to use all of those. Vantage, of course. The Vantage Pro wasn't out yet. We had to use all that stuff. And then I start working in a shop, and the Underhood Service magazines just show up essentially for free, right? Whatever. You're sitting at the break table, paging through, and I don't know. I just happened upon your articles, and I'll probably be able to recall what the first one was, but the ones that were just, I think, life-changing, which I don't mean to be like not pompous, but I don't mean to exaggerate or over-dramatize it. Like, they were a very big deal, and they came at a very pristine time. You did one on trigger, auto versus normal trigger.
Yeah, lab scope trigger, yes.
Yeah. I mean, that was unbelievable how that hit and how much that made sense, and I got to put it into practice, even just using, I think at the time, the LS 2000. And then you did one on in-cylinder. You had taken a Fluke PV350, and instead of using a compression gauge, you substituted the transducer. I didn't have a transducer or anything like that, but just how you wrote it changed how I started thinking about the engine and the piston and the valves, timing and all that. It just, I don't know. You hate to say it upends a lot of what you learned in school, but it did in a good way. That was a huge one. And then current probes. You did one on current probes. At the time, I think you had the Fluke ADI 110S.
The ADI 110S, yes. Still have it. I can't get rid of it for sentimental purposes. I no longer use it, but I still have it.
Oh, man. So I remember reading all that, and the LS 2000 wasn't living up anymore. Like, I wanted more channels or more capability, worried that I was missing out, fear of missing out. You were using something I'd not ever seen before, and it just said TEK at the top, tech. And one of your columns in your bio, you had, for some reason, left your email address in there. I don't know if you wanted that, or if Underhood accidentally did that, or if it was Babcock's at the time had unwittingly.
I don't remember that. I couldn't tell you that, but it was fine. That was fine.
But yeah, I emailed you, and I remember the first, I don't know, a dozen or so emails I sent you. Dear Mr. Thornton. Yeah, I'd asked you about scopes. Like, I wanted something different, and I wanted to make a smart purchase. And at the time, I thought the smart purchase was like the Vitronics MTS 5100 had just been really released. I think Snap-on's Modus was coming, and you had explained what your scope was and that you were very happy with it. And then had spoke a little bit about the 5100, but I should elaborate. You said, hey, why don't you give me a call at the shop between this time? And it wasn't, you didn't spend like 5-10 minutes on the phone with me. It was, 30 minutes of...
I don't recall that.
It was very gracious of you. The shop had bought an MTS 5100, and I was saving my money for a Tektronix, either 710 or 720. I had got I think a 1987 Chrysler Conquest with a 2.6 liter inline 4 with a turbo, and it had a severe lack of power. and I had sent you some information. I apologized emphatically. Like, I don't want to abuse this relationship, if you don't want to call it that. Like, I didn't want to abuse you as a resource. Like, wow, I got phone number, I got your email address, and now you're going to be my bullet provider. That I so badly didn't want that to happen. So bad. And you had me scope. This system had a TBI injection system, throttle body, where it has two injectors, a primary and a secondary. And you're like, I think you should scope the fuel injectors. So I think you kind of already knew what was wrong with it. Well, I didn't understand inductive kick the way I do now. So the answer was right there staring me in the face, but I couldn't see it. And I didn't have a good way to send you copies of the waveforms yet. So finally, the MTS 5100 shows up with the secondary fuel injector, and it was obvious. It was obvious. And now I had a good way to upload waveforms and send them to you. And you're kind of like, hey, go back and scope that fuel injector, the voltage. And it had like hardly any inductive kick. It was maybe 20 volts, maybe. And he's like, when you replace it, take a look at it again. And then, I'd hooked up LS2000 and it was there the whole time. I don't know. It's just one of those awakenings, right? You are responsible for many, many awakenings on my part, if that makes sense.
Just something you said there that I think is really very important in the development of a technician. And that is, you look at bad, however bad is defined, whether it's with a scope, it's with scan data, gas analyzer data, old ignition analyzer design, but you look at bad and maybe you're not 100% sure how to analyze it, but there's something not quite right. And then you have the opportunity, like you did, to make the repair. You put the secondary throttle body injector air in, the vehicle is fixed, there's no doubt, and now you have to take that extra step. You got to do post-repair testing. And now you have just gone to school and you have graduated. You acquired the data. You may not have been sure. You're going to be sure the next time, but not yet. And now you do the post-repair data acquisition. And you say, oh my gosh, there's a night and day difference here. Now maybe I should look up or research what the heck an inductive kick is, or why do coils have inductive kicks and maybe a coolant temperature sensor doesn't. But right, this is, 25 years ago, and, we're just learning a lot of this stuff, and there's still plenty to be learned, but it's one thing at a time. I've always said that the shop is the best classroom. And don't get me wrong, you can learn a lot in a class. You can learn a lot on a good YouTube channel. You can learn a lot from the written word, in a trade mag, whether it's online or still paper. But really, at the end of the day, the impression that changes how you analyze, how you deduce, that happens in the shop. If you follow through. And I realize, shops are busy places. I'm in them pretty regularly, and guys are hustling, girls and guys are hustling. But to take it to that next level, we have to finish the diagnosis. And that means acquiring post-repair data. And then, getting that back to the magazine article, it's no good to talk about, I had this car, it had this problem, this is what I did, and now it's fixed. Well, what does that look like? How did the scan data change, or how did the scope pattern change, or how did the gases change? You have to tie it together. I'm not sure that's occurring as much as it should occur, but I think that can really be a breakout for a tech. I don't care where you are in your career, 10 years in, 20, 30 years in. If I'm still doing it, I want to be better tomorrow than I was today. And you got to do it, to do that. And if you can do that post-repair documentation, it goes a long way. Really, it's pushing you. It's slow but sure, but it's pushing you in probably the direction that, we all want to be. And that's just to be better than where we are currently.
Napa Auto Tech training sessions are being conducted day and night in a town near you. This training caters to every level within your organization, be it a mechanical assistant, a mechanical specialist, a technology specialist, or a driver safety calibration specialist. Imagine a one-stop shop training partner in Napa Auto Tech that will lead your team to a path to greatness. Auto Tech's entry-level Build-A-Tech classes convert the untapped potential of your new hires into money-making mechanical specialists. Auto Tech's higher-level tech update classes introduce specialists to the world of ever-changing technologies, which prevents your shop from getting technologically stagnant. Remember, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. And turning to the front of the store, the AutoTech Service Advisor class is an awesome way to hone your client advocate skill set, ultimately benefiting the customer through an improved vehicle repair experience. But it doesn't stop there. Imagine an electric vehicle class that takes your specialist well past the mundane, yet necessary safety topics. Well, it's here. AutoTech's EV Ready training is a week-long curriculum that takes participants through a hands-on experience involving hybrids and electric vehicles. The session kicks off with the use of PPE and proper tooling while touching on required OSHA regulations. Then, the students dive into the lab vehicles to gain knowledge of the common high-voltage components on EV and hybrid vehicles and their function. Attendees will be taken on a path exposing them to different electric vehicle manufacturers to compare component form and location. Additionally, information about Level 1 and Level 2 charging systems will be included, along with a quick look at DC to DC charging. The operation and maintenance of subsystems are explored, including the different modes of Tesla operations, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Commit to taking your business to the next level with Napa Autotech training. It leads to more conversations or more discussions, because I think that was a big hang up then when it's, if we want to talk like Randy Dillman, we would say a low impedance fuel injector. Otherwise, most of us would say a shorted or partially shorted fuel injector, or at least the coil. That I think part of the data I sent to you was the oxygen sensor would just rail rich, wide open throttle. And I was really hung up on restricted exhaust or turbo not making boost, because the oxygen sensor is just railed. How short of the injector just dumping way more fuel? How is this possible with a shorted fuel injector? And I think luckily for me, you're just kind of like, I'll let you think about it. It wasn't like mean. It wasn't like condescending or anything like that. It was just like, I'll let you think about that a little bit and we'll talk about it. We will talk about this, but I want you to think about that a little bit. And came back like, okay, all this current, that injector panel opened faster. It was open faster and longer. That's why it was just dumping fuel. And then, of course, you're going to see this. Keep your eyes open. Well, the Multex, I think first generation Multex, GM Multec injectors would go short. The injectors would short. And they do the same thing. They would just dump fuel.
Yeah, it was always interesting. Again, this is stretching my memory, but that would be like a 2.8 VIN W and a 3.1 VIN T. And they're well known, for shorted injectors. At one point, I guess in time, it kind of became well known as a silver bullet. And there was different ways you could do it. Some techs might prefer an ohm meter, which many times that would nail it. They would identify it. Other techs would find a connector in the right front corner of the engine compartment, hook up a low amp current probe. And, I was kind of in that group. I was interested now in using these tools and seeing what I could do. But to your point, what was interesting was that depending on how bad the short was. Now, a shorted injector is a shorted injector and it's faulty. But sometimes they would run rich, just like on your Mitsu example, that you hit so much current, the pistons off the seat faster. So let's say the on time is supposed to be 2.5 milliseconds, but the actual flow time may be 1.8 or 1.7. But now the flow time within the on time was greater. But sometimes when they were shorted, they would be lean. And I always thought, that's why when you do analysis or you're trying to share information, you have to look at the big picture. And it's hard to say, well, 90% of the time it's rich and 10% it's lean. You should never say something like that. Because really it can go either way. But it's far more important to recognize that it will upset fuel delivery. So you might go rich, maybe you'll go lean, maybe more often than not you'll go rich, but it's going to upset fuel delivery. And back then, of course, was block learn integrator numbers before we got, we moved along a little bit. But it definitely was a misfire. There was a misfire in the engine. And so, if you look at some of the clues, whether you had an air fuel type of code or a misfire type of code, everybody knew the engine ran rough. That was pretty much a given. And as you were developing your routine, there's certain tests that we should do. Just like today, if I work on a late model Pentastar, I know it has certain problems. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to test for those first, but they're definitely in my routine if scan data suggests that's an appropriate path. And so that would be the same back there. But, of course, back in that time frame, the scan data we had was limited. So it's been kind of nice along my career and to yours to a degree, because you've been doing this 20 plus years now. Easy. to see the change. To what? No, when you grab a scan tool today and you look at those hundreds and hundreds of data pins and say, my goodness, look at what I can do if I do my research, if I learn what these PIDs mean and I learn how to group them in such a way that helps me move forward. That's compared to 10 good PIDs, 20 or 30 years ago. It's just, 40 years ago, I should say, but it's,
Well, and the refresh rate or resolution, if you will, is, maybe not scope like, but gosh, compared to, OBD1 wasn't necessarily slow, but the scan tools themselves, the refresh rates would be on the lower end, the PID update rates.
Yeah, just to add to that, a month or two ago, I'm working on this. I think I'm going to be off a year or two here. I think it's like 2014, 2015 Civic hybrid vehicle. And it has a shutter on acceleration. It has codes. I can't remember what the code was. It's an inverter code. But anyway, my point is I'm using the Honda scan tool. And this is the legacy HDS scan tool. And they have a feature called high-speed sampling. Now, it requires some menu navigation to get this, and you are limited to, I believe, 10 PIDs, but the refresh rate is amazing. Anyway, it turns out that the inverter had failed for one, it's a three-phase motor generator, or IMA, as they call it. But I was able to use scan data. So think about how fast a three-phase winding, those voltages are changing. But I was able to use scan data to say, yes, I think it was maybe the U phase, or I can't recall for sure. But I was able to say, there is a phase that's clearly got a problem from an amplitude viewpoint. So it takes 20 minutes because I don't use the tool every day, but to navigate it, set it up, graph it the way that I want. But it's worth it in the end because you say to yourself, my gosh, that scan tool did everything. Now, it's not a big deal to remove the rear seat, to observe a little bit of safety and throw a scope on the studs at the bottom and get it on a scope, which I did anyway. But my point is to yours as well, that we have come a long way. Now, the refresh rates are pretty amazing. Again, it will never be a scope, but nonetheless, it's pretty darn good.
Yeah, to kind of roll it back, like you said, how far things have come. One thing that you had taught me, and not just me, you taught a lot of people, but for the documentation portion, I was going about it all wrong and probably still do. But you had told me to get myself a nice, two drawer file cabinet and some manila folders or whatever. And then when I print a wiring schematic for something, print it out and then write notes on the wiring schematic or staple a sheet of paper to it and put a number or something next to a component or a wiring or something and leave yourself notes. Essentially notating or annotating, I suppose is a more technical term, to this wiring schematic. And you can tell yourself, hey, this wire is accessible over by the right front strut tower. Open up the harness and you can get a current probe there. Or if you wanted to, this mass airflow sensor is super high failure rate or something of that nature. And then instead of throwing the piece of paper away, you put it in that file cabinet and you start dividing it up by however you want, right? So you can find it. And now as you start building this up, before you run to, if you had a book, but more appropriately, Mitchell On Demand, I think it was called Mitchell On Demand at that time, and then All Data, go to your file cabinet first. And then if you got it, like you're saying, like the 2 8-liter Ws or the 3 1Ts, you could pull that diagram out and go, oh, wow, okay, fuel injectors, duh. Okay, I remember. I could test here by the oil fill cap. I could test here, I think the passenger side of the intake with the low amp probe. I had options, or the ECM, PCM is available pretty easily, removing a cover and accessing on the passenger front kind of by the headlight area. That was a big deal. That's how you documented back then, before it was so easy to do the PowerPoints or just start saving folders and everything and annotating stuff right on a PC. We didn't have that quite yet. Or if we did, the software to do it probably wasn't super available. I suppose AES Waves we could do some with, but when he came out with was it called Annotate? AES Wave Annotate?
I used it. I should remember the name of it. Yeah, when George Menchu introduced that, boy, the name escapes me. I remember I hit 1,000 waveforms in absolutely no time, because it was so easy now, with my tech scope to be able to save. The TechScope, I'm sure you recall, had a floppy disk drive. So there was no stopping me now. Once I had this button called save, and I could actually, because I used to, when I first had it in the shop, I had just a wooden shelf, and I had a printer, and they never would last long because, of course, it's a shop, and these weren't great printers to begin with. But I would just connect my scope to a printer, and when I was saving it on paper, then when George came out with that, and the name, it's one of those things we'll remember as soon as we stop having this conversation. But I remember thinking to myself, when I hit 1,000, I thought to myself, what a milestone. And, little did I know that was just the tip of the iceberg. There was going to be a lot more saves coming. And I don't know how that happened or where that came from, but I remember that, I thought to myself, why should I have to reinvent the wheel every couple of weeks on a vehicle that I'm seeing? Again, I was never a dealer technician. So, I've always been in the aftermarket. So, whatever came in the door is what came in the door. But certainly in most general repair shops, there's going to be a lot of GM product. So, after a while, you do get a sense of things. But yes, to your point, I had manila folders, and I had my 2.8 folder. I had my quad 4 folder. Whatever I learned about those vehicles, whether it was access, whether it was how a quad 4 injector, remember how the injectors were controlled, how that was controlled. I put that in there. If there was extra ghost pulses running through the pattern, oh my gosh, the first time you see a ghost pulse, you say to yourself, well, clearly it's a bad PCM. But then if you hold back and you say, oh, you know what, I see it again. Oh, by the way, I see it in ABS. I see it in tranny stuff. So after a while, you become a little less concerned with some of the things that manufacturers do, but don't talk about. It's everybody that uses a scope has those. I still see that on Diagnostic Network to a degree that, somebody's doing something for the first time, and we all have a day one, and are looking at something, and there's something that's unusual or not to be expected. Is that a clue of bad, or is that normal? And it's always going to be a tough call.
I couldn't agree more.
It's kind of funny. I still have in my basement way too much paper. It's all in the file drawer cabinets, but again, I don't use them anymore. It's all sentimental value. One of these days, they all got to go. But it's it's just notes again. But remember when AllData first came out, they had that thermal paper, which it only lasted so long anyway. But once we got better printing, better printers and such, that went away. But
I remember the shop had gotten CCI Triad was the shop management system, and it linked up with CarQuest specifically. And it came with a subscription to Mitchell On Demand, which was the discs. You would get, I don't know, 8 discs maybe, if it was even that. Well, then we got AllData. It was like 26.
AllData had a lot of discs, yes.
Yeah, changing discs.
A lot of discs, yeah.
All the time. And the PCs did not hold up well.
I know we can look back at it now, and it's it's funny that we had to change the disc to get service information.
Well, yeah, but man, the guys before me, the book, they went and got the book, and sometimes they'd have to go buy new books. And the Chilton guy, Motor would come in, and he would sell us books. And gosh, I remember, off topic, I'm sorry, but
that's all right. It's your podcast.
Yeah, not really. He came in with a book for like interior panel removal, like inner door panels and all. It was so much better than what we had on the computer. Now, granted, it did not take long, a couple of years maybe. Everything on the computer was vastly superior to whatever he could give us on a book. But those books for transmissions, automatic transmissions, and the interior panel removal, God dang it, they were good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like most of us, guys in my age area, we all started with paper. Primarily for me, it was primarily Motor and then Mitchell, back and forth. But that's where you went for service information. Of course, today, thank goodness, things have changed for the better, and we have a lot of options. And the fact that we can, of course, we have to pay, but I can go to the GM website, I can go to the Honda website, I can go to the Toyota website and get that information that's really, really helpful.
No, I was just going to say, like, specifically wiring schematics, the information that you can get, and all that is catching up with the links. Meaning, if you open up a wiring schematic and most of the car manufacturer's website, their service information systems, you click on a connector, it takes you to something where you have choices of more information on the connector, like a visual of it, where it's located, the pin arrangement, or how they're assigned, stuff like that. Chrysler, for crying out loud. It's 3D models. You can rotate the car and zoom in on the connector and then click on the connector and then get a pin view of it. It's insane. And then I think Honda for the longest time had nice, usually black and white, but photos.
Black and white photographs, yeah.
Mercedes kind of does that. I guess BMW. But man, those links to connectors, to the modules, to even the circuits to some degree, mind-blowing, just mind-blowing.
A fair amount of Toyota products, primarily because of some of the cabs that I do in the city of Chicago. So I'm working, frequently on Toyota hybrids. And I do have a subscription to the Toyota website. It's like $13.60 a year, I believe. But of course, you get service information, new car features, training, and you have the scan tool. So, I mean, it's kind of, it's a bargain, but once you get used to an OE's website in terms of navigation, and it takes practice if you're an aftermarket technician, but once you get used to it, it's kind of hard to go back. It's not that I won't use, for example, all data to access a Toyota, vehicle, but I would prefer to use the Toyota website because I kind of know where things are now. I actually, after all these years, I think I can navigate it, reasonably well. Probably not as good as a dealer tech, but, I can certainly get around. And those hyperlinks on the wiring diagrams, they can bring you to the connector, the location. It's quite well done. And of course, I'm not just singling out Toyota because I could go through other examples as well. But, I mean, you mentioned Chrysler, VW. I do not have an annual subscription anymore to Irwin, but, I go there. I think it's $45 for a short term. And I go there as I need to, if I'm working on something that I need a 1,400 page PDF wiring diagram, then I'll go to Irwin. But
yeah, even frickin' BMW.
Oh yeah. Well, again, part of it's tooling, right? When you think about diagnosing a vehicle, whatever the vehicle is that you choose to diagnose, there's certain tools you have to have, right? One of the tools is service information. And if service information is not adequate, it's not thorough, it takes much longer to get the job done. If the connector that you see in a circuit is not where it's supposed to be, if it's on the passenger side A-pillar and you're on the driver's side A-pillar, you're wasting a lot of time. Again, I do like Chrysler, but sometimes in their three-dimensional architecture, and you're looking at a connector. I did this recently with a body computer. The connector, you can't tell, is the connector close to the floor or is it close to the bulkhead? It's hard to tell sometimes. And so, but again, I'd rather use it and have it available to me than not have it available to me. So
yeah. And if there is a mistake, the chances are not that OE doesn't have mistakes. They absolutely do. But the chances of them fixing that before the aftermarket, way higher. And then the bulletins were, recently I think we had a BMW and I was gone for the day. One of the guys looked at, and the details aren't all that important. Long story short is they wanted more time with it. So basically wait for Matt to get back. And if they would have went into even Air, BMW Air, so plunked down $40-$45, they would have found a bulletin talking about a fuse that blows. That seems wildly unintuitive, like not related to the system. And looking at wiring schematics, you could really pore over these wiring schematics and not get to this fuse that popped. But there's a bulletin from BMW about this fuse popping causing this issue. And if you replace it, you'll fix the car. It was not in the aftermarket stuff yet.
Well, even, when I work on BMWs, many times I'll start with all data. It takes determination to really figure out where some of the diagrams are, because more often than not it's there. You can get the information, but you really have to work kind of harder than I have to work if I'm looking for a GM wiring diagram in all data. I'm more familiar with all data than I would be with, let's say, Motologic or others that are out that I'm sure are high quality. But it still takes, you got to be a little bit dogged, when it comes to what we do. It's, just because there's a roadblock, either we can figure out how to go around or we just work our way through it. But, you need that information. Just like you need the right scan tool for the job, you need the right service information for the job.
And for those that just have to know, is the front and rear wipers weren't working. You can pore over some wiring schematics for quite a while and never find this fuse. You will find through the power distribution that it does feed a control module, I think the BTC, but to relate it to the wipers would be rough. It doesn't show up in the wiper diagrams. So then this TSB just points right at it like it. So they like acknowledged it. It's too bad they don't add it to one of the wiring schematics, right? Just put the fuse and a line straight to the module, and then you would add that fuse to one of them. You'd test.
I think many aftermarket technicians have great ideas that would benefit the OEs if they gave an opportunity for us to share our ideas with them regarding many things, scan tool, service information, et cetera, access. But, we're probably not going to make much of a change in that regard.
I mean, if they're listening, I would just want to plug it in and have it tell me what's wrong. I don't think that's so much to ask. This testing stuff's overrated.
I don't know. I think we're a few generations away from that yet, but
probably
we'll see what that happens. So I think one of the other things we had chatted, I think maybe 3-4 weeks ago, regarding our podcast. And I think you said you wanted to talk a little about training.
I mean, I've heard of it. Some people go to
it. Some people deliver it and go to it.
Some people deliver it.
Some people deliver it, go to it.
Even ones in this podcast, and it ain't me. But
well, no, you've done your share. I mean, you were the catalyst for Tech Talk, and I heard you just recently on a podcast. I can't keep track of all the podcasts that I listen to. Oh, you know what? It'll come to me. You were at Vision with Carm and Zeb and
Andrew. Yep, Andrew Sexton.
There is a great opportunity if a technician wants to share information that they know with others. Everybody's got value. If we could somehow pool our knowledge, imagine how powerful we would be. But if you could, if an individual technician says, I'm pretty comfortable with this topic or this tool or this technique, maybe it's gas, maybe it's hybrid, maybe it's diesel, whatever. But I would like to share that. I don't have good confidence yet, maybe in public speaking, or I don't have good confidence in how to organize my thoughts in such a way that it may make sense to someone who has really no experience with what I'm going to talk about. I know I attended Tech Talks a year ago, 2024 Vision. There was 3 or 4 gentlemen that presented. And I thought to myself, these guys did a good job. And it had to be a tremendous confidence booster for them to be able to get in front of a group, like there's 40 people, 50 people, in that room, and to go through just talking to an audience. It's not an easy thing. I don't know what, it used to be years ago, we were told that, the fear of public speaking was quite high, that most people do not want to get in front of a group and say anything, let alone, try to instruct. But, those gentlemen, they did quite the job.
It's so hard to do it and see people, not so much that you don't, or not people that like, don't get me wrong. Like, it's unnerving if you're in there, Scott's in there, people that I hold in very, very high regard. But people I don't know, it's hard to not try to interpret their face and their responses or their looks, whatever that may be. And it's a waste of time because you'll never do it and you're going to be wrong anyways. You think somebody is struggling with your class, that doesn't like what you say, think what you're saying is wrong, something of that nature, and then it's furthest thing from their mind. It's really hard.
Some folks have great poker faces. You look at them, you don't know what they're thinking. I'm forced to be here, or I want to be here. This is great, or it's horrible. I think I've learned over the years that forget about technique, forget about the information that's being provided. You can only do your best. If you've done the job, if you've done the prep, if you've done what it takes to deliver in your mind what is a good class, this is all you can do. I can't force anybody to either accept or believe, agree with me. Now, some folks will, some folks won't. That's how it is.
He's talking about you, Rusty.
Rusty was always polite with me. Not afraid to ask a question, not afraid to challenge, but he was always polite. So that's fine. You have way too good of a memory, actually.
Oh, man. That was good times. I don't know. I enjoyed that.
Well, when you do a class at Vision, for me personally, I can only speak for myself. I believe you have to bring your A game. Now, I believe that with every class. I believe that if I'm teaching 4 guys on a Saturday in their shop how to do something, I'm bringing my A game. Or if I'm in front of 300 people in a double wide room at Vision, you got to have your A game. But there's something about Vision that mentally for me cranks up the pressure. There can be no stumbling. There can be no hiccups. You start on time. You pretty much end on time. You break appropriately. You do your best to share the information and to kind of keep the crowd, the attendees, somewhat engaged. It's easier to address 300 or 400 people if you've done 5, then you've done 10, then one day you do 30, all of a sudden now you're doing 50. So, I mean, it's still challenging. And when you get out there and just before, your mouth opens and you say something like, good morning, good afternoon, you say, my gosh, am I up to this? Am I ready to go? And you just got to hope you are. You got mental muscle memory that you've rehearsed. You spent hours and hours at home rehearsing. I rehearse in front of the wall, but you rehearse, the class. So you think, I've done what I can do. This is the best that I can do. I'm going to just try to hopefully make it work. So I know you know me. Just a couple things. So for those that are listening about training, if I'm asked to do a class at 8:00, as an example, I want to be there by 6:30, 6:45 at the latest. Now that's way early, and sometimes I have to find maintenance to open the door for me. But that's okay, because it's important that the chairs and tables are arranged appropriately. Now, if it's a room of 300, what are you going to do? But if it's a room of 20 or 30, you can do that, because most facilities really don't do it well. Not some do, but a lot of them just throw tables and chairs anywhere, and they have them in a corner. And if somebody sits in that corner, there's no way they can see the screen. I've been in environments where tables have been put relative to the front of the room behind the screen. Now, I don't know why you would ever do that, but I know somebody will sit there. So that table has to be pulled, or those chairs have to be pulled. So an instructor is responsible for making sure that the room is set up in such a way that the attendees can see. So that has to be done. You got to make sure the projector works. Got to make sure the cabling is good. I know anybody that's ever done any presentation has had a cable failure, a bulb failure, a projector not work failure, something's wrong with my computer. You try to minimize that by getting there early enough so that hopefully, because once attendees start to show up for a class, they want to talk to you, and rightfully so. They showed up early, say, I'm going to get there at 7:30. John's probably going to be there. I'd like to just chat with him. Maybe it's somebody I know, but I only see this person at Vision once a year. So I enjoy the conversation. But if I step in the room at 7:30, I can't do both. I can't have a conversation, and I can't remember what I need to do when I get into that room. So there's that piece of it, which is really, some would say, well, that's small, it's insignificant. But if at 8:00 and you're ready to go and the audience is ready to go, but the projector don't work, that is not insignificant.
That one time up at the college that you would present at on the south side of the Twin Cities, we found out that the yellow did not work. It was a bulb, but for whatever reason, it wouldn't project yellow. Well, Pico, when you had 4 channels going, the 4th channel was yellow. That was a big deal, because you're putting up waveforms where you don't see the 4th waveform. And luckily, they did have a maintenance crew that was there. If you could track them down, sometimes that was a bit of an adventure, but they usually got stuff done. And I think that time he just replaced the bulb. Had mentioned that they had been getting the warning to replace the bulb for a while.
Yeah. And there's going to be somebody, that time it was me, where it's going to fail on, right? There's got to be somebody there.
One time we couldn't find anyone. We ended up breaking into the room.
Oh yeah. We moved rooms before. Yeah. I've done, if one is an instructor, not so much a teacher, I have differences there. But if I'm an instructor and I'm teaching a class in the evenings, one class is, 3.5 hours, something like that, there's a potential for a lot of things to go wrong. You can have, like you said, there can be projector related issues. There can be heating, cooling related issues, noise from other rooms that you weren't anticipating. Many years ago, I'm in a hotel in the Chicagoland area. It was pouring rain outside, pouring rain. And I'm in a basement, very nice room. And all of a sudden, the side of the wall cracked and water started pouring in. It really looked, like a small, just like a flood was occurring, and it was getting bigger. And I said, and everybody heard it, that we heard the water is just starting to pour in, but it was kind of, it's kind of far away from us. And I go, yes, I've recognized the issue that there's water. And if water gets to a certain level, maybe an outlet or something like that, there's a safety concern, I'm going to keep an eye on it. But until it gets to a certain level, we're going to continue. You're here, I'm here, we're going to continue. So you do the best you can. And any instructor has stories like that, and many more. But
Linders, your presentation, the projector went out, and you skipped a beat to notice that the projector went out. I think somebody mentioned it to you, like, "Hey, John, the projector's out." I don't think you spent 10 seconds, because what were you going to do? It's this big fire hall. There's no buttons you're going to push, but I think you just kind of wiggled a couple of cables. There's nothing to do. Boom. You just rolled with it. I think you looked at somebody's book twice to kind of know where you were at. That was amazing. That was amazing to just not even skip a beat.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, again, a couple things there that were to my advantage. One, it was a Linder event, and Jim always had lots of support people. So whether it was Randy Dillman or Michelle or Doug or his staff, there was always people around that would take care of the emergency. So I knew at some point, if it could be done, it was going to be done. It was going to get taken care of. But this will just bring me back to, a little bit about training. But let's say that, I've got a class now. I've got some ideas. I put the class together and I'm preparing to deliver it. So the delivery date maybe is 5-6 weeks away. The class is not completely done, but for the most part, it's done. And there's a pretty good chance I'm going to remove something. I'm going to add something a week or a day prior. But it's, for the most part, in my mind, I know what I want to say. My examples might change. My case study examples, maybe I'll work on a car a few days or a week earlier, and the car is just a perfect example of the point that I want to make. I'll somehow make it fit. I can only speak for me. This is what makes me comfortable, is that now that I have that class, I have to start teaching it. And I can't teach it to anybody, so I will. Right now, I'm in an office here at home. I'll have my computer, and I will stand up, and I will present. And maybe the class is going to be, let's say, 3.5 hours. So I won't necessarily talk for 3.5 hours straight. I will present 20 minutes. I'll go through a section of 20 minutes. And that 20 minutes of me talking might be an hour, because I'll talk, then I'll say, that's not right. This slide needs to come before that slide. Then I got to, sit down, I'll straighten that out. Then I'll do it again. So by the time I'm actually ready to present the class, I have taught it to the wall, to myself, so many times. I guess, I don't know how actors memorize lines. I don't understand their process. I don't know that. But it's not that I've tried to memorize the lines, but the class should have a beginning, it should have a middle, and it should have an end, like a story. You don't start at the end, and you don't end at the beginning. You have a process, and you work your way through it, and hopefully it builds and builds and builds. And in my mind, I think it does. Now, somebody might say, John, it's completely disjointed, but I think it builds so that once I open my mouth and I start this topic, I know what's coming next. And then when I get there, I know what's coming next. So when you saw me do that at Linders, and I've had that happen a handful of other times where I lost the projector completely and I had to teach, without a projector or without a PowerPoint. So I had to rely on, I had to either grab the book and make sure I'm kind of staying with the guys, in the class, but it's only because of prep. And if somebody's a new instructor and they would like some advice, there's probably a lot of things we could talk about. But the one thing that I think is most important is that you prepare. And I have a reputation, and I know you know this, and everybody will always tell me about this. Like if I'm at Vision, and for many years at Vision, I did a Sunday morning class. And nobody would ever see me on Saturday night.
You're out partying, and probably some.
Yeah, I was like, well, yeah, there you go. Didn't take long for that.
Some dive bar. I don't know.
Some dive bar. Yeah.
No, we knew you were up there prepping, like legitimately prepping.
Yeah, I'm back in the room. And do I need to do it? I've done it for so long now. Prior to this event, do I need to do it? Maybe not. But in my mind, it's got to be done. It's part of my routine, and I'm going to rehearse that night so that, again, come 8 o'clock, I'll be down in the room, 6:45, hopefully no later than that. The projector will be set up. The lighting is correct. The chairs and tables are correct. I mean, the Vision, usually don't have to worry about too much of that stuff. They've got good staff for that. But you want to make sure. And then you execute. You deliver what you believe to be, good information. But that preparation, that rehearsal, really, really important. Really important.
It honestly reminds me a lot of like comedians, how their process of developing a set. And that almost sounds a lot like what you're doing is putting together, like you have these ideas, whatever the subject may be, whatever the cars might be, and gathering information, kind of starting to mold, what is this joke going to look like? How am I going to deliver it? And then trying it out. It's like, no, I can't. I got to tweak this. I got to change this word. I got to change my pace here. I got to give the crowd a chance to react, stuff like that. And it's just refining and refining and refining. Now, granted, I know they would go out and try an improv, just show up out of nowhere to work on a bit, work on a couple of jokes in front of a live crowd, but the set's not done yet. You're not really doing that so much but you're presenting it to the wall, quote unquote, the wall, and saying like, nope, that doesn't work quite right. Or I got to give the attendees a few seconds to process this or to think about this and move this here. And this has got to come before this. This has got to come after that. That's what it kind of screams to me, is almost working on a set.
Yeah. And again, over the years, I have taken some public speaking classes. I have taken a PowerPoint class or two. It was more technical, and how to use PowerPoint, which I probably only use 5 or 10% of its capabilities anyway, to assist me in that. But, you develop a routine. And so if I were just to quickly walk through like a training cycle, analogous to, a comedian, step number 1, the instructor has to ID the topic. What are we going to talk about? Now, some topics, a number of years ago, in-cylinder analysis was quite popular. Rightfully so. It's a good technique. Doesn't need to be used on every car. You have to be cautious, but it was a good topic. It was popular. That would be worth talking about. CAN bus diagnostics seems always to be a good, popular topic. People are interested in that. We run into those cars. So, and sometimes I can be reading discussion forums, whether it be IATN or Diagnostic Network or others, and I can see, I'll read about it and I'll notice that on more than one occasion, there's a question about this or there's a question about that. And, so I think you may plan to say that, maybe that's a good topic. Or I'm at Vision, or I'm in Seattle, or down in Florida, taking at some event, and then we're talking at lunch over at break, and guys are saying, I got this issue, and I did a class on multi-air one time. I remember I was talking to this guy down, I think it was somewhere in Florida, and he was telling me about these challenges he had with multi-air. He wasn't sure exactly how he knew for sure to put a multi-air assembly on his head. How do I know? I mean, I don't want to just do it because it's expensive. I got to have the tools, that kind of thing. So you have to, one way or the other, ID the topic. And you have to make sure it's pretty clear on what you are going to do, because eventually you've got to write a class description, and you don't want to write something that doesn't match what you're going to talk about. So you got to ID the topic. Then you got to do the research.
And this is where we'll hit pause for today. But don't worry, Matt Fanslow and John Thornton are just getting started. Part 2 of this conversation drops next week. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for spending time with us today. We'll see you next week for Part 2. You've been listening to Matt Fanslow, diagnosing the aftermarket A to Z on the Aftermarket Radio Network. Follow Matt on your favorite listening app. He's very interested in what you have to say. Let him know what you'd like him to cover and come on the show. Matt is all for advancing the aftermarket. Find Matt Fanslow on social media and connect or on aftermarketradionetwork.com.